So welcome to our first California Environmental Literacy Initiative's District Innovation Hub webinar of the 2025 season. Today's topic is environmental literacy, the key to inspired, authentic, and rigorous learning. This topic, I think, is as or maybe more important than ever. It addresses and meets many of the challenges we face. It helps kids care and connect to the earth and to each other, helps build skills, knowledge, and motivation for engaging with the world. And as the events in LA kind of highlight, we have a lot of work to do on our relationship with nature. Our hearts go out to our LA colleagues. We're so happy to see so many of you here today. And welcome to our first webinar of the season. My name is Nate Ivey. I'm an instructional coach in Fremont Unified School District. I'll play the role of MC for our webinar today. I'm a member of the California Environmental Literacy Initiative's District Innovation Hub. Next slide, Tim. Great. So welcome. You know a little bit about me. You've heard just a little bit about Callie. And we'd love to have you put yourselves on the map. So in the chat, there's a link to a Padlet. You can go ahead and open that up and find a little space on your screen. In the lower right-hand corner of the Padlet, there's a pink plus button. You can click that and then make a little card for yourself and put it where you're geographically located. Maybe put it at your school site or in your community. If you've been here before, you might find your card from a prior session and see if there's any updates that you'd like to share. It's a place where you can tell us a little bit about yourself, your motivation, and your work. While you guys work on that, I'll say a little bit about the District Innovation Hub. The California Environmental Literacy Initiative aims to expand access to environmental literacy across the state of California. We're divided into a number of work groups and hubs. And this hub is the District Innovation Hub. And we have a number of goals that we use webinars and other strategies to help address, but we want to build a community of practitioners. We want to share high quality environmental resources. We want to build capacity for districts to do this work. That often includes supporting district leaders, but also classroom teachers and practitioners and school sites in advancing this work. Part of the way we do that is we showcase best practices and leading edge exemplars. And that's a lot of what our session is going to be today. We believe that, you know, there's 1,000 districts in California. We're a big state. We know we got a lot of folks from LA here today. You're our largest district. And if we can get districts implementing systemic changes to help guarantee access for all kids and really think about how the different parts of a district work together to support this effort, we think we can really make effective change. There's a number of systems approaches to environmental literacy and environmental efforts, the Green Ribbon Schools, which thinks about environmental impacts, environmental health, and environmental learning. The 4Cs model, campus curriculum, and connections to community and culture, and the Green Schools National Network model, which Tim might tell us a little bit more today. So our agenda usually follows a pretty typical pattern. If you're here for the first time, we spend a couple minutes, which we've just done, with some welcome and connections through the Padlet and an introduction to the hub. Then we have a featured speaker or panel to bring us information and insight about a topic. We close that out with some Q&A, and that takes about the first hour. And then we have time in breakout rooms for people who want to go deeper. If you have some follow-up or individual questions, we usually have some prompts that help move the conversation forward, an opportunity to find your colleagues and learn from each other. So we really do hope that if you're interested and interested in diving into this topic a little more, you stick around for the breakout rooms and connect with some colleagues around the state to learn from each other. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to today's featured speaker, the esteemed Tim Baird. Tim, take it away.
Thank you, Nate, and welcome everyone. We're glad you're joining us today. Let's have some fun here for the next hour and a half or so. And a little bit about me, as Nate mentioned, I do a little bit of work with the Green Schools National Network. I've worked with these guys even when I was in district. They do excellent work across the nation, and some of the materials I'm sharing today are their materials. I was superintendent in Encinitas for 10 years. And whoops, nobody wants to see that guy anyway. There we go. Superintendent Encinitas for 10 years. And we were the second district in California to get the U.S. Green Ribbon. And so we're very proud of that in Encinitas, still continuing the work. And as many of you are, it's a never-ending thing that we are committed to. Like Nate, I am a member of the California Environmental Literacy Initiative. I am one of the co-chairs this year, along with Glo. Glo, are you there? She's probably out there somewhere. And then I have other duties as assigned in the Beard family household. So we're going to talk a lot today about teaching and learning, and I'm going to jump into that in just a second. I do have a folder where I have some of the materials I'm sharing that you can access. We will put this in the comment section in the chat so that you'll see it, and we'll have it at the end as well. So don't worry if you don't get it right here. At this point in time, I'm going to throw up Jerry's sign in and sign out. And Jerry, did you want to say a few words to your teachers? This is open to everyone, but we do know that we have a large share of LAUSD teachers here today. And one of your leaders in environmental literacy, Jerry Song, is here with us today. Jerry?
All right, thank you, Tim. And again, it's wonderful to have you all here. Again, I wanted to first start off by saying thank you to Dr. Baird, who has offered to graciously provide this webinar once again, because I actually got to hear it, kind of the first version of it, in the Green Schools Green Schools and Higher Education.
No one knows the name of that conference.
I know, it's a long
Don't worry
conference.
about it.
Green Schools and Higher
California Green Schools and
Right.
Higher Ed Summit.
Thank you.
And I don't even know how I remembered that. So go ahead.
So that summit in Pasadena, I was able to attend last year, and basically I was able to hear Dr. Baird's presentation. And what I loved about it is it just aligned so well with everything that we're doing in LA Unified, and really focusing on empowering our students, putting our students in control, giving them putting them in the driver's seat, because again, the whole goal for LA Unified is to really prepare our students to be ready for the world, right? And it is going to be a world that, as we all know, has many problems, and we need to prepare them to be able to mitigate and to deal with, and hopefully even solve some of these global issues that we are aware of, especially climate change, right? And so I also want to thanks Callie for doing this. And again, I got to be a member now, and it's been a wonderful experience getting to know a lot of people and really learning a lot about everything that Callie's doing. And so again, I just wanted to share one last thing. Basically, the quote that kind of drives LA's climate literacy approach really is, tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn. And so really the focus of all of this is to really involve our students in these issues, and rather than having them be the object of our teaching, that they are the ones who are learning, and they are the ones who are actually leading their own learning, right? So again, thank you everyone for joining us today. And I hope you enjoy the session that Dr. Baird's about to give just as much as I did.
Thank you, Jerry. And we will put this sign-up sheet in the chat again at the end if you didn't get it. So it'll be there. So I want to start with what is environmental literacy. There's a lot of talk about it, but I do like the NAAEE definition. It's someone who demonstrates the knowledge, dispositions, competencies, and behavior to actively engage individually or as a group in addressing environmental challenges. I like to add to that, though, I'm sorry, I've got a quick trigger finger today. I like to add that this is best taught in an environment or educational setting where we're actually practicing what we're talking about. So you're going to hear a lot today about how we utilize our schools, our districts to do this work. This is not happening just in your classroom or somewhere else. It should be happening in our schools and our districts, and that's how it's best taught. So that'll also be sort of a background to everything. Now, I've got a lot of teachers in the audience. I tell you, the first thing you're thinking is, okay, so another new set of standards. And here's the good news. Even though there are lots of great environmental literacy standards out there, including our California principles and concepts, and there's the education for sustainability standards, and there's tons of them. They're all good. You don't need to use them. Here's the good news is California has already integrated these into your state standards and frameworks. That doesn't mean you shouldn't highlight them and you shouldn't focus on them, but they're already there. So we're going to see new materials coming. AB 285 mandates that new materials are going to be taught for climate change. So we're going to see some stuff coming to support you in this work, but you do not have to add another layer of standards on top of all the standards you're teaching. However, when they're in there, they need to be taught. So we're going to talk about how you integrate these standards with what you're already doing. With that said, I do like the sustainability mindset that I have in front of you to really talk about, this isn't about a set of standards. This is about a way of thinking about this work. When we talk about sustainability, we often talk about profit, planet, and people. We're going to leave profit for your CBO. They can worry about the money stuff. Your teachers, I want you to think about the people and the planet aspect of this. And so these are my most valuable principles, or my MVPs of sustainability. And it's pretty simple. One is make the learning authentic, both in terms of how we address people and how we address the planet. Connect this learning to your students, to your communities, and connect the learning to the planet. Get your kids out of the classroom, get them outside, get them into nature, get them into the environment. Just make it more authentic than we currently do. The next is value. Value people, value the planet. That should be an easy one. It's more people need to recognize this, that we should recognize the commonalities we all have and embrace our differences. And of course, we should be valuing our planet. And then protect yourself and others and protect our Earth. These are pretty easy concepts to remember. MVP, and it's just a mindset. It's not a set of standards. I want to talk about the big picture, and then we're going to focus down into that curriculum thing. I use this, this veggie burger to talk about how districts think about change and how we should think about sustaining ability. I don't call it sustainability because it's always happening. We're never done. But when you think about this, it starts with leadership. These are things that our leaders can put in place that provide budgets, that provide personnel, that provide supports, teams. That's leadership. That's a great foundation, and that makes the rest of this a lot easier. That good stuff in between the buns, facilities and operations should be practicing what we're talking about, and curriculum instruction is what we're teaching our learners. And by the way, our staff are learners, our community are learners, our parents are learners. It's not just students. So we're going to focus on that piece. And then you hold this all together with that culture and climate top of the bun. A solid culture and climate is what makes this all work. And that's why it's a veggie burger. You have to do it all together. It's not just one piece or another, even though we're going to focus on that curriculum instruction piece today. All right, let's start with some big ideas about teaching and learning in general. And let's start with these ideas of what should students learn, and then how do we teach these things? And this is not just focused on environmental literacy. I'm going to talk a little bit about AI. Not the AI you're thinking about. That's there. It's going to happen. Your students are going to be bringing it into the classroom. You should be using it too. I'm talking about authentic intelligence. This is real learning. This isn't about rote memory skills or things that artificial intelligence will help us do much faster than we can do. This is about being able to use artificial intelligence intelligently. So AI, in my mind, we need to be teaching our kids authentic intelligence as well as how to use artificial intelligence. What does that mean? Well, I've been using this learner profile probably for 15 years now. And I start with 3 learning domains. The learner, the team member, and the worker are those learning domains. And then on the left, I have the traits and work habits that we should be promoting. And on the right, the knowledge and work skills. Now, if you look at that very closely, you're going to see that most of the time in our schools, we spend a lot of time in that worker domain on subject matter mastery. And I'm not saying it's not important, but that's a pretty small segment of this learner profile. And in fact, with artificial intelligence, it's probably one of the least important segments on this learner profile. I like to spend a lot of time over there on the left in the traits and work habits. I think that we don't spend any time at all hardly in our schools doing that. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. And I love for our teachers to spend more time up in there in that learner domain and that team member domain where we're teaching kids how to be thinkers, how to be authentic learners. And anyway, so this just gives you some grounding in where I'm coming from, that I think the worker domain is important. I think subject matter mastery is important. I think it's one really tiny piece of what our students should learn. Talk about those real world traits and skills. Traits are things that I think we can influence. Kids come to us sometimes with these things and we can model them, we can share them. Skills, I think, are things we directly teach. When I was superintendent, those skills were on the front of our report card. We gave feedback to students about this. We had lessons on these things. This is part of what we taught. Now there's a lot there, so I have sort of narrowed it down to the most important ones, I think, that support environmental literacy. But if we're not teaching our students how to persevere, how to collaborate, how to be resourceful, and if we're not focusing on those elements of optimism, curiosity, altruism, I think we're missing a big piece of this. So these are part of the learning and they're sort of baked into some of the things I'm going to be talking about today. Another way to look at things is that learning pathway. And again, I'm just talking about learning. I'm not talking about specifically environmental literacy. But when we talk about learning, Bloom was always really hard for me to try to build lessons around using all of Bloom and everything. So in my teaching career, I simplified it down to kids need to acquire new skills and they need to acquire new learning. They need to be able to analyze what they're acquiring and they need to be able to apply it. Application is the top of my scale here, even though this goes down. And it goes from simple to complex and it goes from artificial to authentic. The goal here is to have complex, authentic application of real learning that has already been through the acquisition and the analysis stage. Another way to think about that, here's some verbs tied to it. Students need to be able to do all three of those things really well. And we need to get out of that simple and artificial stage where it's about a worksheet or it's about this one simple activity that isn't tied to real learning in real life. Another way to look at this is through that application. This is really hard to read, but this is in my materials. But when you start to look at that artificial simple application, it's usually a lesson. It's not really tied to a lot of things. And it's pretty simple based. It could be, game-based learning. It could be building that bridge out of popsicle sticks that we've all done. We didn't teach them anything about engineering. We didn't teach them anything about what it was doing, but it was fun. And so that's simple and artificial. When we get to the D quadrant up there, now you're talking about, these are usually units. This is something that has an authentic audience. This is really done for a reason. And it's things like designing, a school plan for waste, or it's doing an anti-idling PSA, or building an energy team that's actually looking at energy use on your campus. These are getting more authentic, more complex. And that's the kind of work that it doesn't always have to be that, but we should be making sure that that's part of what we do. Here's some examples again. I'm not going to read you everything on the screen, but it's, do something tangible, do something real. Start that garden, implement that recycling program, inform others about an issue. That's important. That's an authentic audience if you're informing somebody and making that happen, or convince others to make changes. I had a fifth grade group of students at a school where they worked all year long on changing a law and working with the California legislation. And they went up and met with senators, and ultimately the law passed. I don't know if it was all they're doing, but they think it was. And so, that's kind of a real way to learn about writing and what, effective speech looks like. And so anyway, I just make it real, make it authentic. When we start to talk about actual skills, I'm a big fan of design and research as authentic learning process skills. These are two things that I think every student needs to be able to do well. And I flip them around because I think it isn't always research then design. Sometimes you start with design and that moves you into research. But I want to talk a little bit about what these two do. Now, when I talk about research, I'm talking about the scientific process and information literacy. I think we do a pretty good job of teaching that scientific process. I think we don't do a great job on teaching that information literacy, and it's a place we need to get better at. Design is really design thinking. There's lots of different versions of design thinking process. But when I talk about design, I have a specific design thinking process I use, but there's a lot of them out there. So research again, we're talking research. We're talking about students working with scientists, doing real science, not filling out a worksheet per se, but actually doing, investigations, using science to solve real problems. And again, I think we do a good job of that, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. Information literacy, there's so much information out there. We live at a time where there's more information on your kids' phones than we ever had access to in all the encyclopedias lined up in all of the libraries in the world. So they have information. What do you do with that information? How do you share it? How do you know that it's right? How do you test it? And again, these are things that not only our students, but we need to know how to do. These are things that need to be taught. And so often we just assume these things, that kids know these things or that teachers know these things, and it's really complex. So often we will just say, hey, go research that. And it feels kind of like that room in Indiana Jones where it's in there. We just don't know where it is, how to find it, or how to make sure that we found the right thing that we're looking for. So there are skills here to be taught. There's a lot of work going on in this area right now. And if our students are not able to do all of these things, then we have failed them. And so we've got to be better at information literacy. And otherwise, they're going to get information, or they're going to hear things that aren't true, that they're going to believe. And you're going to get people telling them things that don't know what they're talking about. And I think that sometimes we find that there's things out there that are not real that we need to do a better job of vetting. So let's go to design thinking. I think that design thinking is an area that we've all started to get more interested in. But again, there's a process, there's a teaching that goes on here, and it's not just go design something. When you just say go design something, you don't always get the product you want. And we need to help our students and our teachers to do a better job with this by giving them, some work in what this looks like and how to improve it. Now, I know 50% of our audience out there might not realize why this is bad design, but just trust me on this one. It's bad design. It might help on Splash, but it's not great on anything else. So you've got to look at things and realize that that the design process takes time and it takes training. And it's prototypes, it's testing, it's all of the other things. Please do not try this one at home, folks. But I'm just saying is that if we don't test, we sometimes get bad product because we didn't do great design. So this kind of all comes together. And then I'm going to jump into actually talking about, what we're supposed to be talking about here today, environmental literacy. But this kind of all comes together and kind of what I call the learning balance. I have a bunch of slides I'm not going to show you about this that show this connection between that acquire, analyze, apply that goes in both directions, that talks about how the acquire side of this focuses on that research, getting that information, building those skills, finding out that information. And it's really an acquisition focus. It's about convergent thinking. It's about that deeper conceptual understanding. And I have some slides that are in the folder that I'll share with you in my library that show what that looks like, that deeper conceptual understanding. On the other side is the application, and this is the design area. This is where that design thinking process comes in, and it's about getting to application. It's about that divergent thinking, and it's about creativity. And the reason I call it a bounce is that as you go deeper into acquisition and conceptual understanding, you get a bounce that comes out of that into higher levels of application and design. And then the more we think about that design, we go then back deeper into acquisition, because now we have deeper understanding to ask better questions and do deeper research. And it kind of goes like that. So I love this way of thinking about learning, because our students need to be able to do all of the things on this slide. And if they can do that, they're pretty far along the road to learning here. So let's talk about putting this all together, wrapping this up, and then getting into some samples of what this looks like. So in Encinitas, we use the term DREAMS for our STEM. It uses those process skills of design and research, and then it uses those content areas of engineering, art, math, and science. Why those content areas and not PE, social studies? Well, these spell dreams, so that's why we used it. It's also STEM. And so we use it a lot. We talk about it, but what it forces us to think about is design and research. That's the main point. It forces us to go there. One last thing on teaching and learning, and this is kind of encapsulates everything I'm talking about right here. So when we look at, let's say we have a learning outcome that we want students to be able to have the skills to build a house. Current practice in many, many classrooms right now is what I call the Home Depot method. We take kids, we march them down the hallways in Home Depot, and we teach them every tool on every shelf. We talk about, okay, this tool does this tool does this tool does that. This tool over here sometimes can do this and sometimes can do that. And we take them and we teach them every row in Home Depot. Ever so often, we'll give them pictures of those tools and say, what does this tool do? We'll ask them to write it down maybe. And then we give a final at the end where we ask them to tell us about what building a house is all about and what tools you might use and why you would use them. That's the Home Depot method. I'm asking that we maybe start thinking about the YouTube method, which is start building a house. You don't know how to build a house. Your students don't know how to build a house. Start building a house. And what would you do on YouTube? You go in and find out, what does a foundation look like? Who's building it? Talk to some experts. Find out. And as you go, you're learning the tools that go with it. We don't have to know all the answers when we start the unit or the teaching. And so if you think about it as a YouTube learning process, we're going to start building the house. We're going to make some mistakes. We're going to learn what tools at what time. Are we going to learn every tool in Home Depot? No. But neither did the ones that went through Home Depot, by the way. And at the end, we're going to have a house. We might have finished at different times. We might have made a lot of mistakes, but we're going to end up building a house. Some of your kids will know more than others, but I guarantee you that they're going to have a deeper level of understanding of what they learned. Why? Because of learner engagement. If we can engage our learners in a deeper level, then we are going to have, success in whatever you want to teach them. So what does that mean? Purpose. So they understand why they're learning. They understand why we're using this tool to build the electrical. If you can tap into their passions, better yet. We should be doing more of this, but and I'm not saying that building the house is every kid's passion, but if we know their passion and we can build that into our teaching, do it. They're going to be excited about it. They're going to learn more. If we can give them some power over the learning, time, team, task, and technique, those are some areas you can give power to learners to do this work. And then ultimately, if we could make it fun. I don't mean to chastise us, but school's the only place where we can make learning not fun. Learning, we're hardwired to learn. We love to learn, except for when we go to school. And so I challenge you to do this. Tomorrow or the next day, when you give homework, give home play. Give them something fun to do. It's like it's not everything's work, job, a drudge. Learning is fun. Let's remember that. All right, let's get into environmental literacy. I want to talk about some tools that can help us look at environmental literacy in a way that sort of gives us some guidelines for how to get into the work. And I'm going to talk about a couple of different strategies here and give some examples of what that looks like. So the first one is 4PBL. You might have heard of PBL. It's problem-based learning, or it's phenomena-based learning. This is language that Green Schools National Network uses. 4PBL: phenomena, place, project, and problem. Really good starting points for some of this learning. So if we start to look at this, I'll take you through each one just a little bit. Phenomena is just something happens, let's learn about it. We can either create the phenomena or nature can create the phenomena for us. If you see a butterfly outside, that's a phenomena. That could be a great lesson for a kindergarten class. This is an example from 2017 when we had the eclipse here in Southern California. And a number of my colleagues were, they were frightened to death of this thing. They were locking their kids in rooms, closing the blinds, making sure everybody stayed huddled under their desks so that nobody got sued. We took a different approach. We bought 7,000 sets of glasses. We sent everybody outside, and we made it a phenomena-based learning experience. And I just think that, when nature serves one up this easy, we better be grabbing it. And so if something's happening around you that is phenomena-based, drop what you're learning and go learn about it. This is, again, get kids outside. There's tons of phenomena out there. Place-based learning is another easy one. Here's an example from the Ojai Unified School District. Right next to the high school was what used to be a wetlands before it turned into a dumping ground, and they planted a bunch of eucalyptus and did all sorts of other naughty things that destroyed that wetlands. And so the high school and the district got a grant to restore that wetlands. And this became a years-long project for not just the high school. You see elementary students out there now restoring that wetlands and bringing it back to life. And from the very first day they started to today, which is many years after, that is a wonderful learning place for kids to go from pre-kindergarten all the way up through high school to do various types of lessons and learnings. And it's just this beautiful wetlands now been restored by these students and used daily by students in that district. So place-based is a really great way, again, get kids outside. And, I'm a big fan of school gardens. Here's some gardens from Encinitas Union School District. These are great places to teach about nutrition, to teach about, plants and growth and pollinators, bugs, also reading, math, science. You can teach anything out here. I want to go there now. I mean, these are just inviting places for kids to learn and get them outside. And if you've got a garden, that's a great place to go. Gardens can be different things. This is a hydroponic garden. We were teaching kids how gardens can be used for different purposes. And it just, the bottom line is kids love to get their hands dirty. Let's get them outside and get their hands dirty. Projects and problems I put together only because I'm a bigger fan of problem-based learning because I think project-based learning is teacher-driven. Problem-based learning oftentimes can be student-driven. And so whenever possible, I try to turn a project into a problem. For instance, here was a no idling campaign. Teacher started by saying, we're going to do a no idling campaign. Here's the 12 things you're going to do. Here's what it's going to look like. That can be turned into, how can we improve the air quality in our pickup and drop-off zone? That's a problem now. Now kids are starting to think about what are things we need to learn about? How do we go about this? How do we find this information? So take it away from teacher-driven to student if you can by turning it from a project into a problem. That doesn't mean projects are bad. They're good too. But whenever you can, try to make it a problem. Here's one that was a project because we were working with our local botanic garden and they were doing a National Science Foundation study on looking at whether plants, bees were more attracted to native plants or non-natives. And it was primarily bees, but they were looking at all pollinators. And so kids from kindergarten to high school could help with this project by studying, gathering data, and sharing with the Botanic Garden that shared with other botanic gardens across the United States. Work with local partners whenever you can. There's great things going on out there that kids can be a part of at every level. Creating teams. This is, again, started as a project. We're creating a student energy team, turned into problem. How can we reduce our school's energy use? And then start thinking about what that looks like. Again, you don't have to know all the answers. That's the beauty of this. They're going to help you find the answers. Another way to look at this is question-driven learning process. So when you start thinking about this in terms of questions, I'm a big fan of questions. If you can start the unit by asking a good learning question or leading question or driving question, there's lots of ways to call that question out. I call it a learning question. If you can start it with a question, that usually makes it a problem-based learning, or it helps get it in that area. And I always believe a good question is better than a great answer. If we can start with a good question, that's going to drive this learning. Another way to look at this is that learning question. It should lead to intensive research. It's not something that should be easily found out. You don't need to know the answer. It's better if you don't. If you know all the answers, you've already figured out everything they're going to do, and you've already created the pathway. And sometimes building that pathway is where a lot of the learning comes from. So you don't have to know all the answers, but you have to work with the students as they find them out and make sure that you're keeping them on track. This isn't without guardrails. And then ultimately, when I get a learning question, I always like to start by refining it. This is make it clearer. Make it so that we understand the activity and the context more clearly. And then I follow that up with defining questions. And I'm going to give you an example of this, but these are questions that talk about where is this happening? How is this happening? What are we measuring? So that we know what we have to learn. And then I always try to give students time to expand the questions. So let me give you an example of that. So here was a question. How do we start a recycling program? Okay, not horrible. But as you start refining it, and this is something kids can do. So you start asking, what problem are we trying to solve? Where are we solving this? Is it, across the whole world? You talking about in the community? You talking next door? So there's questions like that where you refine it down to get it clearer in terms of what you're trying to do. So from those refining questions, you now have a new question. How can we reduce the waste going into the landfill on our campus? All right, that's a much clearer question, right? So now we can look at that and say, all right, I know what we're talking about now, but that leads then to defining questions. So now we start talking about, okay, well, what type of waste are we talking about? How much waste are we already producing? How do we know? Why are we producing this waste? Where's it coming from? What are we doing about it now? These are things that need to be found out in that acquire phase as we start to find the answers to these things. So what these defining questions will do is lay out what your unit's going to look like in a sense. These are things that we have to learn about. And then you can take each of these and then create a lesson with outcomes, with strategies, with standards. It can all be done. And then again, I love to put expanding questions in there because sometimes students will come up with things we haven't even thought about. Like, what does our city and county do with the waste? This is a great question because sometimes you don't want to know because sometimes it's not very good. Or why are we getting things that are so wrapped up in plastic that we have so much waste? That might not have been part of yours, but that could come from a question that follows up. And that's might be another unit dealing with food services, for instance, and trying to reduce waste on that end or with purchasing. So always go to those expanding questions. Here's a good example of why. This was a first grade teacher teaching about the Statue of Liberty. And one of the first questions the kids had is, why is the Statue of Liberty holding that iPad? Well, maybe we need to tell about the tablet holding the laws and the rule of law and those things. So anyway, I always like to let students have, doesn't mean you have to do anything with them, but it's nice to hear what their questions are too. And again, there's questions around acquire, there's questions around analysis, there's questions around design. These are all things that, anytime you can ask a good question about what you're doing, that's usually helpful. So this is just another way of looking at it. So for those of you looking for something that looks more like a lesson plan, I did create something called a learning quest, which is a more structured format in terms of looking at this. And it basically has 5 steps. It's about questions again, then the understand step, the experience, solve, and tell. Here's what that looks like. Questions, usually that learning question. Again, it's refine, define, and expand so that you've got that really tight learning question, all the things we need to find out about it, and then things that might expand off of it. The understand, these are sort of the filters that we need to know about. For instance, the task filter. How long are we going to spend on this? Sometimes if you're building this unit plan out, you kind of want to know, is this a month unit? Is this a week unit? What resources do we have? What tools do I need? Those kind of things. You might even put in here under the task filter, I need to hit these standards, so, and then sometimes there's personal filters, what are things that I know? What are things that, I have bias on in terms of this? And then the end user. Remember, this is design. Design is always built around the end user. If we haven't talked to our end users or looked at what their needs are, and we're trying to fix something for somebody else, we haven't done our due diligence. So understand also looks at what the end user is looking for. Then you get into experience. These are where we answer those questions, whether that is through an experiment, through an exploration, whatever. And ultimately, we design something, we solve it in one way or another. Either we answer those questions or we create something that answers those questions. And then within that solution phase, we have to determine what resources do we want to spend here? What's the best option? Do we have prototypes we can choose from? And this is important. If you can find an authentic audience and format for this problem, it's so much more powerful. And you are not an authentic audience. I'm sorry, teachers, you're not. The kid next to you that read your story to the kid next to you, not an authentic audience. Read this to your mom at home, not an authentic audience. Nice audiences, all lovely people, not an authentic audience. You know who is an authentic audience? The principal, maybe the city council, maybe the school board, maybe a government official that they're writing a letter to. That's an authentic audience. So get them in front of an authentic audience as much as you can. Here's another way of looking at that, just the same things I've already said. But again, emphasize these are kids that were designing a new club. I think it was around paper airplane model building or something, but this was a free time activity, but they were in design mode right now. And they were trying to find out what other kids wanted from this club. So let's talk about some sample projects in the little bit of time we have remaining. So here's one. This is not my favorite, but I wanted to share it because it might be a little closer to something that feels comfortable. This was a teacher design project. I would like to say it was problem-based, but it's not. It was more project-based. But I give her credit that she did a learning quest and really took kids. So I would have probably refined and defined and expanded that and turned it into a question rather than she made it a question, but she'd already had it all figured out. So if you've got it all figured out, it's a project. It is not a problem. You've already got a project designed for kids. A problem is something they help you solve. But be that as it may, it was nice to see her go this direction. She did some great work around acquisition, learning new things. Now she had these all planned out, but that's okay. She did some great analysis on what she saw, and ultimately she applied it in meaningful ways. So good example of how a teacher approached this in a more comfortable way by having all the steps planned out ahead of time. The more comfortable you get with this, the less you need to do up front, and the more you kind of are walking without a net, but you're going to go farther. Here's another, again, this is in my data stuff. You don't have to read this. I can't even read this, but I'll tell you what it says. This is a different form of lesson plan where it talks about the project or the problem being, how can we improve the air quality around our school? And then I break it down into the research aspects and the design aspects. Again, this was me designing it, so it's more project, even though it starts with a learning question. But it uses questions to drive that research and questions to drive that design. And then that ties to specific activities. This is in the library, so you can see all this. And I'm not saying this is the end all be all to a lesson design, but it's another example of what lesson design can look like to do environmental literacy. And you don't have to do this every day or for every lesson, but I'm telling you that if you're not doing these kind of things, break out of your mold, do one. I used to do Fun Fridays. We'd put the books away and we would actually do real learning. And then Fun Friday turned into Fun Thursday, Friday, and then it turned into Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And anyway, and then my principal found out what I was doing. And then it was okay. He liked it. It was good. Here's one of my favorites. These are kindergartners that were learning about the impacts of straws on our marine environment. We're marine based. We have an ocean nearby. And so they found an authentic audience. It was Superintendent Baird and the board. And so they came and said, excuse me, we're a green school district. Why do we have these plastic straws? Do you know what you're doing to our turtles? So I was very happy to be called out in front of my board. And within a week, we got rid of the straws. However, once you start, it's going to continue. So now we had fifth graders at another school that heard about that and said, well, okay, you got rid of the straw. We still have that plastic wrapper and the spork and the thing, whatever. So that's a big bundle of waste. What are you going to do about that, Dr. Baird? And I said, okay, you guys help me. So I made it problem-based. I said, give me an answer. You have to use the funding that we have. This is not just free for all. And you got to come back with some answers. Here's some of the things that students from around the district came back. These came from kindergartners through sixth grade. We were K-6 district. Some of them biodegradable materials and stuff, but when they dug deeper in the research, they don't really biodegrade in landfill. So that wasn't great. Let me show you my favorite ones. Here was one, bring own utensils from home. This was one that I really loved. Dr. Baird, if we ended school at 11:30 and everybody went home, then problem solved. We'll all eat at home. I had to explain to that child that we couldn't do that, but it was good thinking. Another one said, stop serving such good food. We'll stop eating your food. We'll bring our food from home. Good job. And a lot of them provided utensils that were made out of like vegetables and things. So either breadsticks or chopsticks was one of them, celery that you could use as a spoon, things like that. The real answer that came up, which we have started to implement, is going back in time to when we have dishwashers and actual dishes and trays and plates and utensils. And I think this might be in all the schools now. It was in 5 or 6 schools a couple of years ago. So, which was the right answer. And multiple students came up with this one too. It's like, well, why do we need to throw away? Why don't we just wash them like we do at home? They were right. Another example, dealing with waste. Here's a design product that came up from students and adults at one of our schools that then expanded to all of our schools. This is called a scrap cart. It helps us with separating waste so that we can use it for various things and get it in the right things. This is less needed the more that our local recycler is getting better at what they do, but this is from like 15 years ago or 12 years ago, I think now, this cart. How much time are we looking at here? Here's a student video. I want to show you a PSA that they did to inform their parents about what they were doing. So this is, again, that authentic audience. Here's a case where the parents are an authentic audience so that they know what's happening.
Here at Capri Elementary, we have designed a really cool waste management system. It starts during lunch when the students separate their waste into different bins. Worm composting, citrus, recyclable, and trash. At the end of the day, we take the composting scraps to our school worm bin, which then feeds our school garden.
So now we're going to dump this out into the worm bin so we can make it into compost.
This eventually comes back to lunch in the fruits and vegetables we eat.
So Capri used to have about 15 bags of full trash before we put the waste management system in place. So we would throw out 15 full bags of trash during lunchtime every day. When we use the scrap cart and we use it properly, Capri only actually throws out less than 2 bags of trash per day. So that's a pretty big change. Each bag of trash weighs about 15 pounds, so you can do the math on that one. We're saving a lot of money and a lot of space in the landfill.
Why did EUSD put this waste management into every school?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, we did it for a couple of reasons. One, we are an environmental school district, so we try to encourage practices that are good for the environment. And sorting through your waste and recycling what you can and composting your fruit and vegetable scraps is good for the environment. We also did it to save money. By putting the scrap cart system in place, we've saved the school district over $40,000 every year because we're no longer throwing out trash, or we're no longer throwing out the recycling material when we could be putting it in the recycle bin.
How does the scrap cart help our school?
It helps because Mr. Shaw needs to always take out trash, and now we can reduce more trash bags.
How do you feel about the scrap cart?
I feel great because now we can help everybody to put the trash in the correct column.
How have Capri students responded to using the scrap cart?
They responded for following directions while we said where should we put the trash and the composting center.
Is the scrap cart working?
Yes, it is working because, as I said, Mrs. Sean used to throw a lot of trash bags, and now we can recycle more.
Please join Capri in reducing your school's trash and help save the environment.
So it's an easy way to share with parents what's going on, but from a student voice. Here's another one that students, through their research, found a town, I think it was in the UK somewhere, that was having a problem with cigarette butts. And so they started doing something like this, which is a forced choice. Throw your cigarette butt in one of these two things. We don't have cigarette butts on our campuses, but we do have glitter sometimes. And so it's a forced choice for students to say, I prefer Disneyland or I prefer Universal Studios. So it's kind of a fun way to put your trash away. And this school, so they started with that. And then they did an analysis of trash before they implemented this design. Then they did an analysis of trash after, and they had a percentage of trash reduction that they shared with their principal and me. So it was interesting to look at, and it did make a change. So they have to change the topics ever so often so that keep it relevant, and they continue to use that. Here's another one that again, we run off directly. Our water runs right off to the ocean here. So we have student teams that work on stormwater reduction. Now we have water specialists that work with our students, but they do everything from clean out drains to write up best management practices. And we did get a grant from the state to actually put in bioswales. So students worked with our contractors, with our geologist, and the whole planning process to actually put those bioswales in on 6 of our campuses. And it just was a real valuable learning experience, both in working with professionals in terms of the work they do, but then also seeing the difference they made in keeping water on campus. So there's lots of ways. Everything that happens on your campus is a learning opportunity, every single thing. Another thing that students did is look out into the community. So we have a local YMCA, which most of our kids go to for camps and different things. And some of our students came back and said, they don't do recycling. Well, 4th graders at Ocean Knoll Elementary School handle most of the recycling for their campus. And they said to their teacher, we can do this. Let's help them. So we contacted the YMCA. The YMCA said, sure, bring it on. And kids became their technical advisors. They came in, they set up a learning quest essentially. They gathered their data, they talked to the YMCA officials, and they drew up a very detailed plan that they presented to the YMCA board, which was adopted, and it is being implemented to this day. I go to that Y, I see their signs up all over, I see their cans all over. The plan that these 4th graders created is being used by our community. So there's lots of ways. Our kids have been to the city council, the kids have been to the Parks and Recs coordinators. There's just lots of things that you can do in your community to make a difference. And your kids are very powerful. Those 5th graders that went to Sacramento, they got to talk with congressional people that I couldn't talk to as a superintendent, because everybody wanted to talk to the kids that showed up to talk about something. Nobody wants to talk to the superintendent. So again, there's a lot of power there. And when kids show up and talk to my board listens to them more than they do to me too. So if a bunch of kids show up and say, why are we, putting straws in these packets? The board was very attentive to that. So your kids have a lot of power, and use it judiciously, but it's something that can make changes in your community as well. We actually have something
Before
called
you
Farm
continue
Lab, which
on,
is what's
uh,
that?
sorry, Tim, before you continue on, I'm
Yeah.
getting some direct messages, but can I just ask you, especially from the perspective of a superintendent, obviously Encinitas is a very different size than LAUSD.
Yes.
So, but with, what are some tips you may have to our LAUSD teachers to work with in such a giant, school district where, OEHS is a giant, it has, almost a floor by itself, let alone just one person you have to talk to,
Well,
right?
it's nice if your principal is an advocate because they have links to other levels of leadership. Um, and then I know LAUSD, like San Diego Unified here, has sort of areas and subregions within. So start to work with those. Find your allies, find your Jerry songs that can get some focus on the work you're doing. Find those authentic audiences. If kids get in the newspaper, if they're on TV over something, if they're holding an EnviroFair and people are seeing it, your district office people start paying attention. Um, get go for California Green Ribbon. That brings attention to your school when you get those kind of accolades and awards, and people start paying attention. The more successes you have, the more things you're implementing, the more people will pay attention to you. And sometimes it just takes one or two things, and then make sure you market it right. If you're saving money through your waste plan, then make sure that people know that, hey, we saved, even if it's $200, we saved $200 this year because we put more money or more trash in recycle than waste. And we could talk more about this offline, Jerry, and you can get it back to your people. But it's a great question because it's not always easy to get to superintendents and assistant superintendents and directors. But find your advocates out there. They're there. And I'm going to wrap up here. I was just going to say that we have something in our district called Farm Lab, which is actually a research and design center for this kind of thinking. And again, it's another way of saying that if this is important, let's put some resources into it. This is on a 10-acre parcel. We also have an organic farm there that feeds into our nutrition services. But this isn't where kids come to learn to farm. It's where they come to learn to do research and design. And they do lots of things. Here's a group that they're creating their own salad dressing company, and they're actually making a salad dressing. They're bottling it. They're having judges from the community come in, and the winning salad dressing is going to be over at that YMCA at their annual ball. And it's the most fun in the world to come judge these things because they always have great names and lots of fun with it. Anyway, here's all the things I talked about. They're in my library, and you can see them there. I'll throw this overview thing in if it's not there. And then again, we're not going to do that, but I want to make sure this got up there again, make sure this gets back in the comments. And I know I threw a lot at you, but you don't have to do all of it. Do one thing, do something, ask a good question, take kids outside, do one thing that pushes back a little bit on, we're going to sit down, we're going to open a book, we're going to fill out a worksheet, do something different than that. And this will have been successful. Again, my materials, we're going to put this in the chat. You can see it. My granddaughter having a great time doing something. Anyway, I know you've been putting comments in. It's 5 o'clock right now, so I'm going to take us to the end here, Nate. This is for you from here.
Great. Tim, will you go back to the reflection slide? I just want to invite people to spend a moment solidifying something that they heard or learned or were thinking about today. This was a river of information flowing past you for the last 45 minutes or so, and I encourage you to think about that last 45 minutes, the different things Tim spoke about, and pull something out of that river of information and put it in your reservoir. A good way to do that is to think about an appreciation, a reflection, or a commitment you might make. In the chat, answer one of the questions. What's something you appreciate about this work? What questions do you still have? Or maybe what is your next step? Don't feel like you have to answer all three, but please do answer one. It'll help you just anchor a little bit of the learning. one of the appreciations I have and something that's really on my mind is Tim's reminder to us that we are all expert learners. We are people who have figured out how to learn things. And I think, in our position as teachers, we often feel that we have a responsibility just to tell the things we've learned. But I think Tim's message that resonates most strongly with to me is we don't have to know the answer because we're so good at figuring things out that we can include students in that process of figuring stuff out. There are so many opportunities to make our campuses better, to solve real problems in the real world, and to make a difference that'll bring us meaning, improve our communities, and build connections among our students and within our community. So, Tim, that message really, really resonated with me. There are some good comments in the chat. One question, Tim, is what are some ways to get the students to buy in? I think, encouraging students to look around, identify things that are interesting to them, and then supporting them in figuring out about them. But Tim, what would you say about some good ways to get students to buy in?
And
I would go back to that.
sorry, Tim, specifically for the comment that was on there, it's also a continuation high school. And so if you can maybe address also how to get the older students to really get motivated, right? Thank you.
So, oftentimes I go back to that slide on learner engagement. So if it's something that the student is passionate about, that makes it a lot easier to get the buy-in. Now, it doesn't always work that way. So if it's not through something that they're passionate about, giving them some control over it, who's on their team, how they're approaching the project, when they're working on it, what it's going to look like in the end, if they have some control over those things, those are good ways to get student buy-in. And I think sometimes just getting into the project, it's naturally engaging. I've seen students stay in over recess to continue working on something because they are so excited about it. Now, again, I'm talking about younger students, not high school continuation students, but I've seen it there too. It's if it's meaningful to them, they're going to engage with it and do it. That isn't always easy to do. I'm oversimplifying this, I know, and sometimes they have to. We have to jumpstart it a little bit by getting them into it. But getting them out of the classroom, that's a great way to get them going. Getting them to see somebody who really does this work, that's important. That sometimes is a great way to get kids engaged, where they can actually see a real scientist, a biologist, somebody who works with water quality. Anyway, there's lots of ways, and we can talk some more too, Jerry, about maybe getting some ideas out to your people.
I just put a note in the chat. I couldn't find the link fast enough, but in 2023, one of California's National Green Ribbon award-winning schools was Redwood Continuation High School in San Mateo County. They have amazing programs on campus that have hands-on, authentic learning, often tied to career technical education and career pathways that are really meaningful to kids. One of the things the students did there that was unbelievable to me is they went to a sawmill, learned how lumber was harvested and processed, helped in that process, brought lumber from that sawmill back to their school and built a greenhouse using traditional joinery methods out of this redwood that was harvested after the fires in San Mateo County. Just, unbelievable creativity among the staff and the students to pull something like that off. So again, connecting it to things in the students' immediate life are really useful. And just, Google and find out a little bit more about the school that might really connect with that particular person who had the question. All right. Thanks for sharing that, Tim. This is our first webinar of this season. We offer them the last Thursday, the last school Thursday of each month. We are working on our slate of offerings. A lot is changing because of the changing and rapidly changing nature of the world. And we always want these sessions to be responsive to the needs of our community. So please give us some feedback on today's session. Hopefully Paulina can drop that link in the chat. And if you have a suggestion of something you'd like to see in a future webinar, please let us know. one of the questions about back to that prior slide, one of the questions about making change is how to leverage the different relationships, whether you're in a small district or a large district. Again, taking that problem-based approach, not knowing how it's going to work out, but following and figuring out how your systems work can be really useful. One of the resources that can help you do that is your community partners. There are, just a huge number of community partners in the state of California that really care about connecting kids with environmental learning and environmental power. So you can dive into the searchable database if you're looking for someone to help you with an energy project, a waste project, somebody to connect you to a very local resource at one of your, community parks. There's probably a partner who is expert in that, that you can help your students find out about, and that you can build a relationship with to help you navigate some of these big and complicated systems. So take a look at the partner portal. And we always like to close out the webinars with an opportunity for you to meet with others, to tell a little bit about your story, to hear what others are working on, and to dig through some of the topics that came up. So we're going to invite you into breakout rooms, 3 to 5 people. When you get into a breakout room, please do a quick round of introductions, where you're from, what you do, maybe the grade level that you teach, and some questions to maybe organize your thinking today. Based on what you heard today, what role were students playing, and how might you support students in filling that role in your situation? What connections can you make to what's happening at your school? What specific ideas or strategies presented today could be successfully implemented? What challenges might you experience? And what wonderings might you have? You might also want to just spend some time sharing some of the stories of things you've tried, some works in progress, and maybe getting some advice from your colleagues about next steps you might take if you're feeling a little bit stuck.